forgot to do this. Okay. Then as far as getting the net profit go, you're going to take the markup and minus out the overhead. Okay. So overhead is going to be found by taking the selling price times by the overhead percent, and the net profit is going to be taking the markup minus the overhead. Okay? So if you look at number one says find the markup, overhead, and net profit. So when they're saying that in the directions, how many answers should you have? Three. Guess what? How much is that problem worth then?
3 points.
Yeah, good job, Dan. So on page 523, it gives us the selling price is $140. It gives us the cost is 56. The overhead percent is 50%. Okay? Of the selling price. So, first thing that we need to do, let's find the different things. The markup, okay, as you guys should have already had. How do I find the markup? What do I do? This should have been last week.
Selling price minus cost.
Yeah, selling price minus the cost. What was the selling price for this item? $140. Minus, what's the cost for this item? 56. Okay. So what is 140 minus 56? 84. So $84 is the first answer. The second one talks about finding the overhead. And the overhead says that it's 50% of the selling cost. What was the selling price, or selling price, not selling cost? What was the selling price again? 140. So to figure out the overhead, we're going to take 140 and we're going to multiply it by the 50%. Now, as I mentioned, and I don't know how many times I've asked Derek, when you have 50%, that needs to move the decimal 2 places over. Okay? So what's 140 times 0.5? 70. So the overhead was $70. Then, after that, we need to find the net profit. Okay, and what you do to find the net profit is you take the markup, 84, minus the overhead, 70. And what's 84 minus $70? 14. So, what that means for you as the business owner is, what's something that's about $140? Because it never does say what the item is. Shoes. Okay? So the pair of shoes that you sell for $140 costs you $56 from the manufacturer. Means that you marked it up $84 to get that $140 price. The overhead on it is $70. Now the 56 is part of that cost, but the 70 would be like your, how much for your employees, how much for your shipping costs, all that other fun stuff. Then you take the markup minus the overhead, and you made a net profit off of those pair of shoes of $14. Okay, you're selling them for $140, but you only made $14 off it. Okay, and that's covering the cost of me hiring you to sell them. Okay. Number 2 says the selling price is $964. The cost is $578.40, and the overhead percent is 35%. Okay? So again, the first step that we need to do is let's find the markup. The markup is we take 964 and we subtract out 578.40. What's 964 minus 578.4? $385.60. Then we need to figure out what that overhead is, and the overhead says 35% of the selling price. So we take the selling price of $964 and we times it by 0.35. What's 964 times 0.35? $337.40. Now what we do from this for the last part of it is that we're going to take that overhead or the markup minus the overhead. So we're going to take the $385.60 and minus out the $337.40, and how much profit did I make off of that whatever item it is. $48.20. So that means that whatever that item was, because it never did say, that we made $48.20 off it, even though that we had to sell it for 900 and almost $1,000 bucks. Okay. Everybody okay with this so far?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So it's a little bit of a process, a little bit of steps. Keep in mind that for number 2, you need all 3 of those answers. If you just give me the last one, you're going to get a -2 on it right away. So make sure you list everything that you need to have. If it asks you for those 3 things, circle them. Do whatever you need to do, because that's what I'm going to look for when I grade it. Number 3 says toy trains sell for $28,995. The cost is $15.95. The overhead is 40% of the selling price. And again, it's the same 3 questions. Find the markup, overhead, and net profit. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the selling price, which was $29.95, and we're going to subtract out the cost, which is $15.95. And if I'm not mistaken, even though I haven't been here the last 2 days, haven't you had this problem before?
I believe so.
I believe so. I think it was in the other 2 assignments that I gave you when I was gone. What's $29.95 minus $15.95? 14. It was like that, I think, on Friday too, and possibly even Thursday. Okay, so that is the markup.
Is that the same thing, or just showing us a problem that we had?
No, this is all number 3, Dennis. But that problem, I think that they've used that as just find the markup rate
Number 1 and 2.
on the other. Yep, but this is number 3. Okay, now we need to find the overhead, which says it's 40% of the selling price. So now you need to take $29.95 and multiply it by 0.4. What do I get when I take $29.95 and times it by 0.4? 11.98. Okay, so here was the markup, and this is the overhead. Now to figure out the net profit, I need to take the $14 and subtract out the $11.98. And how much do I get? How much? $202? $2.02 was my net profit. Okay, so those are the 3 numbers that we're looking for number 3. Okay? So again, it'll ask you to find the markup, it'll ask you to find the overhead, and it'll ask you to find the net profit. So you need to have all 3 of those down for number 3. Then on number 4, it talks about peanut butter. Weird, it's the same problem as it was in the last 2 assignments, I think, if I remember right. But peanut butter selling price is $3.79. The cost of it was $2.84. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract those so that I can find the markup. What's $3.79 minus 2.84? 95 cents. And that's the first answer. Then it goes on to say that the overhead is 24% of the selling price. It sells for $3.79, and we're going to times that by 24%. So what's 3.79 times 0.24? How much?
0.9%.
No, it's not. We're not in percents right now, Dennis. It should be. We should take 3.79 times by 0.24. 91 cents.
Oh, shoot.
Maybe you were just telling me the number, but that was a percent. That's okay, Dennis. That's your overhead. Now the net profit is, now I take those two numbers and I subtract them. What's 95 cents minus 91 cents? 4 cents, good. So, right here is the markup. This is the overhead, and this is the net profit. So markup, overhead, net profit. Those are the three answers that you need to have for number 4. And when you turn the page, number 5, 6, and 7 are asking you to find the net profit. What you need to do on that one is, and some of you will mess this up, you do not take 20 minus 40 first and then times it by 30%. That will not give you the right answer. If you notice up in the chart, it has in the parentheses selling price times by overhead percent. You need to take the 40 times by the 30% first and then take 20 minus whatever that number is. Okay? That's how that chart is going to work. Then the rest of them, 8 through 12, asks you to find what the net profit is for each of those items. I don't believe, in looking at this really quick, that you have to list all the other answers for those ones. It just says what's the net profit for 8 through 12. However, you have to do all the other pieces like we did for 1 through 3 in order to get that answer. But just know that on 1 through 4, on 1 through 4, you should have 3 answers for those. You should have the markup, you should have the overhead, and you should have the net profit for the first 4. Then after that, it just wants the net profit answer. That being said, you have to do all the other pieces in order to make it work. Okay? Anybody have any questions on how we did that?
So 5, 6, 7, you take the 40 times 0.30, subtract 1.
Yep. Take the 40 times 0.3 first, get a number, and then times it, or then take 20 minus that number, Dennis.
Oh, you're gonna need 12.
You got to do 20 minus 12. You had the other way around. 8. Hardware company purchases door hardware that sells for $29.86 each. It charges customers $49.99 for the hardware and installation. The labor and other overhead costs totaled $11.75 for each set installed. What's the net profit per set? Okay, so for this one, on this particular thing, it says the hardware company purchases door hardware sets for $29.86. That $29.86 was the cost. Does that make sense? Okay. Then it goes on to say it charges customers $49.99 for hardware and installation. That's the selling price. Okay. Then it says labor and other overhead totals $11.75. So in this particular case, what they did, Emily, is that they didn't give you percents. They just gave you what that number was. Okay, for the labor and the overheads. What's the net profit for each of those? So if I take minus $11.75, first of all, that number is $428.39, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but that also does not. That what I did was in that $49.99 is I minused out the labor and the overhead. Have I minused out the cost of the materials yet? No. Then I got to minus out the $29.86. And what's the end result? $8.38. So on that particular one for number 8, it it did not give you the percentages, it just gave you the numbers already. So you would have just had to subtract them. So that means that every time the hardware company has James wants him to install a door or a set, hardware and everything else, they're making a profit of $8.38 off of each one. 12 says Thomas Gibson has managed Craft Cave for over a decade. That doesn't matter. He buys trimming knives for $11.28 a dozen. He sells them for $3.38 a pair. The overhead is estimated to be 25% of the selling price. What's the net profit per pair? Okay, so first of all, we got to find a couple different things. $11.28 is how much the cost is for a dozen of them. So I just want to know how much it is per one. 94 cents. But it says that he sells them by the pair, so now I'm going to multiply that by 2. So really I could have just multiplied or divided it by 6, but either way.
180.
How much?
180.
So the cost on them for him is $188, but the selling price is $338. So if I take $338 minus the $188, what do I get?
5.
Huh?
1.5.
1.5? Then it also says that the overhead is estimated to be 25% of the selling price. So 338 times it by 0.25.
85 cents.
85 cents.
What do you do for number 8? Or is that what you do right now?
What do I get?
65 cents.
Or was it?
And that's per pair. Okay.
I wasn't, I was warm my nose when you did it. I wasn't paying.
Okay. To go back to number 8, Dennis, and we'll talk you through it again. The $49.99 is how much it costs. That's if you were to have it purchase it. Okay, that's the selling price. It goes on to give you the $11.75 is what the overhead and material or overhead and other costs are. So I subtracted that out, and then I also had to subtract out the cost of the hardware itself, the $29.86. So what it did differently, it didn't give you the percentages; it just gave you the numbers automatically just to subtract them. Okay, so it would take $49.99 minus those two numbers that it gave me. It gives me a profit of $8.38 total. Okay. So, anyway, that's on page 523 to 524, 1 through 12.